Hello, my name is Rich Howard, owner of Architectural Builder Supply, and this video is to bring you a closer look at the Rixson. This is their part number 117-1/4 is what this is. This is a offset pivot. Now, what is a 117-1/4? It is an offset pivot, and I'm looking at my little product catalog that's here. In the world of pivots, that sounded biblical. In the world of pivots. There are two types, really. There is center hung, and then there's offset. The only difference between the two is where in relationship to the door does the vertical axis of pivoting occur. A center hung goes down in the center of the door, the center of the thickness of the door, not the center of the door, although it could be in the, if you had a 5-foot wide door, it could be at 30 inch. It could be in the center of the door, but it's really the thickness of where that vertical axis of pivoting falls. Okay, offset means that vertical axis of pivoting is measured from the face of the door out a certain dimension to the vertical axis of pivoting. That's either 3/4 or it's 1.5 inches. The 117-1/4 happens to be a 3/4 inch offset. So an offset pivot is going to certainly behave very much like a hinge, in the sense that in your mind's eye, the vertical axis of pivoting is through the barrel of each of those hinges. Same thing with an offset pivot, same concept. Even though the vertical axis of pivoting is not in the same place, they're close. Okay, they're within 5/8 of each other, approximately. So how you elect which pivot to use is going to be based on what is your application. If it's a single acting door, you can use center hung or offset, although offset would be the more typical application. There are times when you cannot use an offset and you have to use a center hung because, let's say that you're double acting. There are instances when you cannot use a center hung at all and it must be offset, maybe because of the application and the way in which the door needs to swing and how it's going to be hung and the weight of the door. So there could be limiting factors as to what will force you into a direction. If you're open to determining what kind of pivot you need, really ask yourself, do you have a need? Ask yourself, do I need to get away from offset pivots? Because that's the right one to use when you have a single acting application. And the reason I say that is because while you see the hardware, you can add intermediate pivots to it, eliminating the potential for any sort of door warp. If you have the need for concealing the hardware as much as possible or double acting out and then in, then it's going to be center hung. The downside of center hung is that you have to treat the door specially in terms of how you prep it. And then, because there's no concept of a intermediate center hung pivot, there is no such thing, any warp in the door, the manufacturer will determine that the door is improperly hung. And while that doesn't happen often, it only needs to happen once for it to be a problem. So be mindful of that. People want center hung because they don't want to see the hardware. Great, I love it too. I think hardware is most elegant when you don't see it. However, doors usually need something in the middle or between the top and bottom to make it happen. So we're dealing with an offset pivot in this case. A conversation about which way to go, that's going to be more of a design question and an application question for us if you're purchasing the pivots from us, or it's going to be your specifier or your consultant or your architect or whomever, or yourself. So a 117-1/4 is different than its other brethren in the sense that the 117, there is a 117 model. There's a 117-1/4. There's a 117-3/4. There's other variants of this stuff that make you kind of want to pull your hair out because it's not very logical, the way in which they've indicated all of these part numbers. Actually, I believe it would be I had said there's a 117-3/4. That's not correct. The point of the matter is you'll have these different part numbers that don't correlate to logic and what you get. And a 117 is not a 117-1/4. So be mindful of your part numbers and how you're selecting them, because it could be the difference between a hammer and an orange. So let's speak about the 117 and the 117-1/4 really fast. Now they are both offset pivots, as are many other pivots from Rixson, and there's a link below this video to the product catalog where you can pull that up quickly and start to just shuffle through the material. If you're new to pivot hardware, I would very much recommend that you review page 4 of the product catalog. Just the area where it talks about offset versus center hung. That's going to make things really clear to you. Okay, all three that I've talked, the two that I've talked about are there, and then the one variant of the offset, they're both there. Okay, now the 117 and 117 1/4 are both offset pivots, and the part number is almost the same. But the 117 1/4 specifically means that the bottom portion is going to be mortised to the jamb. Okay, a 117 has a plate underneath here that will be mounted to the floor. The 117 1/4 is a very atypical model for us to sell. I don't sell the 117 1/4 often, and I think it's probably because most people are just dropping that hardware on the floor. But there's a reason that the 117 1/4 is actually elegant, and that is because, and it really is helpful to look at the catalog, because you'll see this is going to be a left-hand model, what we're staring at here. With the 117 version, you're going to be having that large plate underneath the door. With the 117 1/4, you take that plate and you remove it. This jamb portion that's going to be here, you're really not going to see anything on this side of my hand when the door is closed. You're really only going to see this portion here and not this large rectangular plate underneath it. So the 117 1/4, while it's not the most common by any stretch, is an elegant idea, because it even goes further to hide your hardware and to give you the center hung type of look when people want to really conceal their hardware. I say to people, well, what happens if the door warps? Well, that'll be the door manufacturer's problem. No, it won't be. It'll be your problem, because the manufacturer's warranty clearly states that a door has to be properly hung. So you can kind of get into a 117-1/4 and still have some concealed hardware, even though you're going to toss an intermediate pivot into it. And they do make a petite intermediate pivot. You know, the M19. Now, moving forward, looking at the product catalog, the 117 1/4 model is for interior doors. Even though you can use them for exterior doors, you can. But it's generally going to be seen on interior doors up to 250 pounds. That's going to easily handle any of the doors that you're going to throw at it. And if you have a heavier door, you probably are going to be getting into certainly different pivots, but maybe different hardware altogether. Because if you need to self-close the door, you're not going to be dealing with a surface closer at that point. So the closing mechanism and the hanging hardware, hinges or pivots, or overhead closers or floor closers, are going to have to marry each other to be able to work together. We're dealing with generally interior doors, up to 250 pounds, 3'6" wide. Now, the other trick about pivots, really quick, is when we talk about these part numbers, people will say, oh, the 117 1/4, great, now I need the top pivot. Rixson pivots, their part numbers reflect what is being discussed. In the case of a 117-1/4, that part number literally means the entire pivot set, the top portion and the bottom portion. Intermediates are never included. Those are added extra. But a set is a top and a bottom. Now, if you want to talk about the top only, you can, and they list that there. That's the 180 top pivot. But you wouldn't say, I need a 117 1/4 and a 180. To me, that means, okay, well, you need a set, and then why are you asking for an extra top pivot? So be mindful of that. It's tricky, and it took me, 17 millennia before I understood it, but now that I do. So that's how they categorize their part numbers. The 180 is the standard top pivot, and we've got that here. And by the way, this hardware, this 117 and a quarter that we're talking about is in 622 finish, and that is black. It's in the black powder coat finish from Rixson, and their sister companies, their Pemcos, their Rockwoods, their McKinneys. These guys are tossing black on their hardware. Black is like the new polished brass, and I kid you not. In fact, I sell more black in 2018 and 2019 than I do polished brass. So black is the new polished brass. It is a very cool color, there's no doubt. It's powder coated, which means it's an exceptionally durable finish, so be mindful of that as well. Very durable. Powder coating is very durable. We're talking about finishes. The bottom line is Rixson can do this stuff in lots of different finishes. Suffice it to say, your brasses, your bronze, your chromes, your satin, your polished, your oil rubbed, powder coated black, obviously. Custom finishes, probably not. If you wanted this material in gunmetal, you're probably not going to get that, or polished copper. No, that's not going to happen. But your architectural finishes, you're certainly going to get. So I won't list them because there's going to be 15 of them, if not more. Now, moving further into the description, this is a 3/4 inch offset. We discussed that. We're going to go over it again in the template. With an offset pivot, if you install it per the template, your door has to be beveled 1/8 and 2, or also known as 3 degree. 1/8 and 2, or 3 degree, is saying the same thing. If I have my door and it was swinging in that direction, that angle is literally 3 degree. Okay, if I put a straight edge on here, that's a 3 degree angle. Or they want 1/8 and 2. For every 2 inches of door thickness, they want this dimension to go over 1/8 of an inch. 1/8 and 2. This is an 1 3/4 thick door, most likely. So it won't be quite 1/8 of an inch. It's just going to be shy on that. But that's the definition of 1/8 and 2. Bottom pivot is mortised into the side jamb. We talked about that, and we'll go over it with the template. Weight of door is borne by the floor. Sure, you're mortising and screwing this to the jamb, but Mother Earth is doing all the work. Okay? Mother Earth is doing all the work on that. Now, let's move on. AB supply. Okay, we didn't pause that video when I took a phone call, so here we are. So we are going to be talking about the fact that this is not a fire-rated type of option. You would not be doing this in a fire-rated version. If you need fire rating, you'll be looking at a different style of pivot. And what even further complicates it, unfortunately, is that when they get into fire rating, there is a dash, to the part number, or there's either a dash, like a dash 20 if you're doing a 20-minute, or there's a prefix like F. So it would be an F117 if you needed a fire-rated assembly. If it's a 20-minute assembly, since you can't do a 117-1/4, we're talking about a 117 model, for example, F117 or 117-20 is how that would actually end up being. Non-ferrous base material. Okay, so that means that this is not going to be made of anything that's really going to rust. Nothing on here is really magnetic, except the plate is ever so slightly magnetic. It might be a stainless-based material because stainless picks up a slight amount of magnetism, magnetic property, when it is worked, machined, things of that nature. Doors 60-inch to 90-inch in height should use one intermediate pivot for every 30-inch after that, and another intermediate pivot. So good practice when it comes to door heights is that you simply, up to, but not including 60-inch, there's no intermediate pivot technically required. But after you get 60 up to 90, go with 1. 90 and above, 90 to 120, 90 to 119 and 15/16, go with 2, and every 30-inch after that, add 1 more. Okay, that's best practice. Furnished with wood and machine screws. Indeed, this is going to have screws for everything. Wood application, machine application, top and bottom. Also going to give you the goods for installing the bottom pivot into either masonry or wood, and giving you some lead anchors for over here. I can't imagine where that would be, really, that you'd have a jam-mounted style going into masonry, but you sure could, I suppose, if your jam was down tight onto a piece of masonry, like you would very possibly see, I guess, in a wood frame application with a masonry type wall. Well, I don't really think I see that. But if you needed to put that down with a machine anchor, with a lead anchor, they're going to give you that and a machine screw, which would be a dynamite way. In fact, it would require dynamite to get those anchors out of the jam. Now, we've covered the product brochure, and really what might be worthwhile is just a study, an academic review of the catalog. If you're new to pivots, dive right in. It will make sense eventually. Rixson paperwork, Rixson templates really seem unnecessarily complicated initially, but they're not. You need all the data that's there. I have never found an instance of a Rixson template that I was lacking the information that I required. These folks have been doing hardware, their line of hardware, since the early 20th century, like pre-World War I. And in fact, I have an archival vintage catalog. I think it dates from 1927 under the manufacturer's page. So if you really want to, look at hardware that's 90 years old, have at it. We have actually had repaired a Rixson floor closer that predated World War I. And that is our record. It was well over 100 years old, or about 100 years old, right around World War I. Now, we're going to close the conversation on the catalog. Let's look at the generally what happens in the world of Rixson is that, and it's relatively new. Once upon a time, it used to only be a template, and that's what you machined and installed from. They do now have a consolidated document, that is the template and installation instructions. The template is page 1 of the installation instructions, so we'll look at it that way. First of all, the important stuff, and I have mortised countless doors for pivot hardware, and I have studied this material until it all started to dance on me. It's important to review the template in the sense that you understand the dimensional properties. You look at it, lots of dimensions. Do you need everything? You might not, but someone else might need other information. If you're having a hollow metal door made, your manufacturer might say to you, hey, I need to see the template because I need to see where I'm putting the reinforcement for these holes. So they might need to see that. You probably don't if you're just going to be machining it, but you sure will want to see that if you're going to be prepping for screws. So all the dimensions are there on page 1. You can review all of that. I want to draw to your attention those important aspects. First of all, the vertical axis of pivoting, lower left-hand area. It is showing you 13/16 of an inch from the vertical axis of pivoting to this plate. From the vertical axis of pivoting to the plate. That's really not so important, but it does give you an idea of what you're dealing with. That's 5/16. So now what are we talking about? 1 1/8 inches. From here to the back side of where this will be applied to or mortised to. The more important dimension really is to look above there at the 3/4 inch, which is referencing, and if you increase the resolution and look at that a little closer, is the vertical axis of pivoting, and here comes our bottom arm. That's going to sit like this. If you recall, I said this was a left hand. That door is going to swing out like this. So from your perspective, it's really operating as a right-hand reverse, right? So they're saying it's 3/4 inch from the vertical axis of pivoting, the center line of this, to the edge of the door. Coincidentally, I don't know if it's coincidental. I don't know why both of the dimensions are the same, but you'll see the other 3/4 inch dimension, which is really what defines the 3/4 offset, face of the door to the vertical axis of pivoting. It happens to be edge of the door to the center line to the face of the door, 3/4 inch. That's important to know. Now, you know where your pivot point's going to be on the bottom. Well, you also know that your line has to be plumb. So if you look in the upper right-hand corner, you're going to see the same dimension, even though it's buried there. The vertical axis of pivoting, or the center of your pivoting, to the edge of the door is going to be 3/4 inch. Now you know where you're going to start to position this hardware on your door so that you can prep it in the right location, get this installed. And by the way, Rixson does manufacture a piece of equipment called they have a tool that, a quick spotter they call it. It's a tool that will fit into your top pivot, gives you the ability to fit the tool into the top pivot, give you the ability to connect the area where your plumb bob is going to drop. Plumb bob and nylon twine is by others. Drop that plumb bob down, and that's going to give you where you're going to locate this. As long as these two are plumb and located in the right place, you're golden. That's going to work. So the rest of the dimensions, that's the important stuff for you to know. 3/4 offset, 3/4 over from the edge, vertical axis of pivoting. Now, on the template page, the other thing that's important to know is the undercut, meaning how deep are you going to mortise this really huge arm, which is 7 1/4 from here to here. That's related to your undercut. So you can see that they show it without a threshold and with a threshold. If you were to realize the relationship without threshold between 3/16 of an inch and 7/8 of an inch, as you increase your undercut, you need to decrease your mortise. And you can take that all the way to where you're not mortising it really at all. But you got 3/16 plus 7/8. And that's going to be the floor to the top of the arm. 1 1/16, right? So as you increase your undercut, you're going to decrease your mortise depth. Not the overall height of the door. That's going to be determined. You'll already know that. What's the door size for simplicity? Let's say that this is an 8-foot door. Let's not be simplistic. You've got 7'10" doors. You've got 94-inch doors. You're going to have an 1/8 of an inch margin at the top. You're going to have a 5/16 margin at the bottom. 93 less. So it'll be 93 and 9/16 net door height. 5/16 gap at the bottom, 1/8 of an inch at the top. Now you know, because your undercut's 5/16, your mortise depth is going to be 3/4 inch. Okay? It's that easy. It really is that easy. And the same logic applies if you're dealing with a threshold application. On page 1, of all of those dimensions, how far in to mortise it, where to locate it, that's all you need to know. Now, what's nice about Rixson in the last so many years is their installation instructions, now that we're moving to installation instructions, have actually produced installation instructions. Once upon a time, it was only that template. And you can see the way I deduced it was that I've done it before, so it comes quickly, but all the information you need is actually there. The other thing I didn't mention on this, and I should have, is these doors must be beveled. If you're going to machine, I had mentioned it earlier, the doors must be beveled if you're going to install this material per the template. And what I mean by that, if you study the margin between the edge of the door and the jamb, I actually do not see a dimension line calling that out. I see the lines, but there's not a reference to the two lines. An 1/8 of an inch on either side is going to be okay. A 3/32 on either side is going to be okay. You might be able to make a 1/16 of an inch work, but that's going to be too tight. So a 3/16 overall pre-fit in the door width, or a 1/4 inch overall pre-fit in the door width is what this template is intended for. If you're not going to be beveling the edge of the door, you have to decrease the net door width, because that door is square edged. You need to be able to get it to go into the frame. So when you bevel it, you know, you're able to approach that more elegantly, where you avoid the conflict area of the inside portion of the door. So you do have to have a standard pre-fit, you know, 3/16 pre-fit or a 1/4 inch pre-fit, beveled 1/8 and 2. If you're going to leave it square edge, you got to be at least 1/8 of an inch on each side, at least. The problem with that, and not doing a 1/17 and a 1/4, but anything fire rated, you're going to have maximum tolerances that are going to be permissible on fire rated wood doors. And if you're doing it 1/8 of an inch pre-fit, you are already at your maximum possible to not fail a fire safe a fire door inspection. Okay, so be mindful. The 3/16 pre-fit's really nice. Nice tight margins, the whole 9 yards. The top is 1/8 of an inch. That's industry standard. Moving to page 2. Locate pivot. We talked about that. Measure 13/16 from the door jamb. Okay, that tells us that that margin is a 1/16 of an inch from the frame to the vertical center line, which, you know, if you're doing 1/8 of an inch margin, I might adjust that a bit. Set the pivot. You mortise the material. You're going to use hopefully a router. You'll mortise everything with a template. Allow 1/8 of an inch minimum clearance from the door stop to door face. Okay, so what they're saying in B of step 1 is allow 1/8 of an inch dimension from the face of the stop to the face of the door when the door closes, and it's called out there. They need to have that dimension because of the way that the pivot point forces the door to articulate through its opening and closing cycle. You need to have that, and if you don't have that, and you will in standard construction, but if you're building a wood frame and making your own doors, or someone's doing that, or you're the shop who's doing it, yeah, you need to account for that. What Rixson will call out in other templates is that they want a chamfered edge on that inside corner if you're tight, and you'll need to, because I've been on jobs where the client said, boy, the doors are creaking. Why is that? So I go to the job site, and offset pivots, heavy ones, 147s, a heavier capacity floor mount, and I realized that the 1/8 of an inch margin is not maintained, and in fact, it's basically nothing. So when the door closes, the door is on the pivot end. That outside corner is making contact with the face, and it's creaking to the point where it's fatiguing the door construction. So you got to really leave that clearance there. Plus, if it's a wood door, you're going to have some movement. You will. That's the bottom line. Part 3 of step 1, where lines meet determines center line of pivot. Yes, 13/16 over, 3/4 from the face, that's the money. That's where you're going to place it. Step 2, mortise the jamb to receive the jamb leaf as shown. Yes, you've got all the dimensions. Now you're going to make all this happen in terms of where you're going to locate it per page 1. I'm not going to go over that stuff. That's carpentry. B, important, pivot end of jamb leaf must be level. Sure. Yes, this needs to be level on the floor. This cannot be manipulated at all, or you're going to have a problem with the way that the arm is going to sit inside of here. It's not meant to rock. In fact, it's not meant to rock at all. It's meant to be flat on there. That bearing pack and that thrust bearing that's there, that needs to be fully mated and completely flat. I have seen instances where they've had to work that floor to get that pivot flat or shim it somehow, but that all works very much against the elegance of your installation when you're shimming or pivoting or addressing something. Step 3, install top pivot and pivot arm. That's easy. That's easy stuff. You have a pin in one end. You got a male end and a female end. You're going to want to address your, call your attention to the lower right-hand corner of the instructions. They're showing that the pivot end is going to be drawn from the bottom of the installation. And again, this is a left hand. So this is going to swing out this way. And that pivot pin is indeed in the bottom of the assembly. Okay. If you were going to turn this into a right hand, and you can, these are non-handed. The bottom portion's not non-handed. That's left or right. But these puppies, 180s, they're non-handed. You would remove that with your Allen wrench, pull that stud out, pull that cap off. That's a hex cap. Put it in through the bottom, tighten everything up, you're done. That's how you want to install it. Absolutely. When you are hanging and unhanging, you're going to do that by manipulating that location of that pivot pin. At the end of the day, it's locked in place by those caps, but it's shown entering from the bottom. Install top pivot in the door and frame. Install the arm per your depth and your position. If there's any intermediate pivots, you're going to install them as well. Then what you'll do is you're going to, when everything's machined and mortised and attached, you're going to take your door, you're going to set it down. This is going to be installed to the door. You're going to set it down. Your top pivot, each of the leaves are going to be installed onto the header and the top of the door. The pin's going to be removed. This is a two-person job. Door is down, bring it up into place, run that pin, tighten it up. That's how the installation goes. When you need to unhang it, reverse the process. That's that simple. Now, pivots are incredibly elegant solutions to hanging doors. They are not for the faint of hearted if you've not done any sort of carpentry. But there was a first time that I did it, and my first time was thoroughly successful. The only problem with the first time is I needed to study the template and just say, okay, and then do a reality check on everything. And once I did, the difficulty is all in the rearview mirror at that point. So dive into the world of pivots. Rixson, the name Rixson is utterly synonymous with pivot hardware. And I would encourage you to explore their product line as best as possible. They have solutions to pivot hardware that literally no one else has. Literally. We've done pivot hardware where the door weight was 3,000 pounds. No one else can do that. No one else has the lineage of the Rixson name when it comes to floor closers especially. That's the area that they truly stand alone. A lot of people make offset pivots. Okay, that's nothing really special about that because other people do it. But the fact of the matter is Rixson has a lineage of knowledge and experience. And by the way, this is a cap. This is a finished cap that will go over the top of your bottom arm to finish off the look. Nobody has their sort of lineage and background. I have been working with Rixson for a long time, both directly and indirectly, machining the material, troubleshooting the material, selling the material, etc. They are a name in the commercial hardware industry that you cannot avoid for long, nor do I think you should avoid them for long. Their sweet spots are certainly going to be pivots. Their name is universally acknowledged, accepted, where they're going to dominate our floor closers. Floor closers aren't really popular in the super northern climates, including Canada. I've been told by some of my Canadian friends that they can probably count on one hand how many floor closers there are installed in Canada, and that's because of the environmental conditions. But I don't know. Chicago gets awfully cold too, and they've got floor closers. So, you know. And if you're dealing with lead-lined material, like in obviously a hospital where you've got, quarter-inch lead, equivalent thickness, what are you going to do? Hang it on hinges? So you're going to look to Rixson sooner or later, in my opinion. Finally, there's a link below this video to the manufacturer's page where you can pull up not only all of the Rixson products that we sell. Let's back up a minute. Just quickly, I looked over at the client's paperwork. On the top pins, you can order those extended. If you need to have an application where you need the pin in the top extended, it can be done. In fact, earthquake code in California demands longer top pins. That can be done, I think, up to about 1.5 inches. If you have a flooring condition that's really odd, where you're going to set your pivot down, but then you're going to lay 1/2 inch terrazzo over everything, you can do it because they can sell you a longer bottom spindle. Okay, I should have mentioned that earlier. That's an option. Those are probably the only options really available on this stuff: longer top pins, longer bottom spindles, obviously finishes and hand. But they can. The point of me saying that is that Rixson can handle the unusual flooring conditions or code conditions as well. So the link to the manufacturer's page will have not only all of the Rixson products that we sell, but also a link to the manufacturer's website, as well as a link to the full product catalog and that interesting vintage catalog I have there as well. Any questions on the Rixson number 117-1/4 offset pivot or any other Rixson product, please feel free to reach out to us. And thank you.